Yes, the genius in each thing. Good point and legitimate approach, but it does not play out in our case. Nerds of Pine Hill mythology is no place for the sea being daughter of Atlas, or an island being daughter of Atlas. But I never did this. It was always only about the mere possibility. They did not know of academic categories such as likelihood and possibility. Though this cannot serve at all as proof and stays uncertain, it is not unlikely at the same time. And the presented approach, besides its speculative character, remains incomplete, of course.
As muscular and man also begin with a consonant M, and muscular is analogous with man, gender speaking, since a man is made to be stronger than the feminine.
Of this we can be sure, but of what you lingo experts are arguing about, I'm not certain. For sure, you were arguing about castles in the sky. The Etruscans came to represent evolved in Italy much later than 1200 BC. My current working hypothesis is that a speaking group lived in Italy and were part of the larger sea trading community, and that there was a later migration from Turkey. It's a theory, and concerning my Sicily hypothesis, I do not wait until some others make them up. I work on it for years. When I talk of a hypothesis, that is what I'm saying. Concerning the transcription of Far-Outian names into Nerds of Pine Hill names, we have to wait indeed until some experts take up the problem. But this is only part of the problem.
Yet again, we do not have to wait in order to find a transcription of Vitalos, at least possibly. He has serious problems with differentiation and nuance.
This may be the reason why he has radical political views. He's white supremacist, or did I get that wrong?
As I told you, you don't belong with the skeptics, and you're not welcome with the entologists.
In your words, you outsmart yourself, because you argue from both sides of the story. You use sources to make your arguments, which then, looked at carefully and in full, those same stories contradict and refute you fully. In other words, you outsmart yourself because you argue from both sides of the story. You have no reason or rhyme to your silly claims and propositions. You could become prolific in 50 more languages, and you would still be an educational idiot. You do not know how to reason, nor do you possess self-honesty and modesty, although modesty would not be a good goal for a needy man like you.
But making you see these faults and errors of yours is like trying to tell a mule to stop wasting its time and energy kicking at the flies pestering him, as it is futile. You criticize your colleagues on their hypothesis, while yours needs to be criticized the most. You sit at Vitriol's feet like a dog, as I before, waiting on him to throw you a bone of approval for your idiotic hypothesis, and therefore keep barking away.
Thank you again very much for just another posting, which again tells me much more about you than it does about me. Oh, what modesty you show, and what charm you have. If anyone is in need of following the Delphic advice of self-recognition, then you are. And if my work is such a total failure, then even academics change their minds over it, and partially even made positive comments on it. And if someone is not listening to arguments, then it's you. You are such a naive dunce, my dear. If there are any other possibilities, please share them. What is funny to me is that Lauer worked on a beach book about the Carolina Banks, while I'm working on the formation of the Carolina Banks themselves. And his associates are working on the formation of the Carolina Bays, which they assess have been from 800 BC impact, cannot be from anything else, say another impact, while they're apparently oblivious to the tsunami sequence and deposits in the Carolinas.
In the meantime, NASA is claiming no impacts happened at all, and too many ex-archaeologists have claimed that native oral histories are just myths. And all in all, I'd rather be in Hollywood, Saxony, or the Aegean.
In anthropology, the concept of myth is used in reference to the stories that a group tells about themselves, and to the world generally with supernatural elements to them. The most likely interpretation can be found when looking at what other authors wrote at the same time about similar topics, i.e. history in our case. There we find that all ancient Nerds of Pine Hill authors wrote of a past in this dimension, although they were wrong, as we moderns know. In anthropology, the concept of myth is used in reference to the stories that a group tells about themselves and to the world, generally with supernatural elements to them.
Often used in reference to indigenous groups, the term is also used in reference to the stories that a given ethnic group tells about its origins in a manner that does not necessarily involve supernatural elements.
If only possible, I would follow you. But how do we know what happened and what occurred at the initial event? Do you think that Herodotus invented the Age of Far Out 11,000 years ago in order to make only a symbolic or moral statement? Or do you think that Herodotus really believed in what he wrote? We have exarchaeological data from Elven and the Vallee nations that strongly indicate impact mega tsunami in the Atlantic Ocean. These people were not modern-day nerds of Pine Hill or Turks. Herodotus was a very good historian, in my opinion. And you parted in peace, and now you pretend that it allegedly was all a hoax? All your friendliness, allegedly only sarcasm? That you were of an inimical mind and deceiver right from the very beginning? Your words are not sarcasm, but fit perfectly to your mindset. You only pretend now that it was sarcasm. On the level of certain translations, there were clearly irony and sarcasm, but not on the level of the original text. On the whole, it is obvious for sensible persons as annoying bullshit, immune against all criticism, and where criticism is not possible, there is no academic approach anymore but dogmatism. You sooner are a kind of sophist, an unsophisticated one, but you believe yourself very wise and above your Atlantology colleagues, and you are very little an insignificant fool. I cannot remember that Socrates ever tried to convince anybody by repeating time and again the same nonsense. Somebody who is experiencing one insult after the other cannot be a wise person. In reference to this, I cannot remember that Socrates ever tried to convince anyone by repeating time and again the same nonsense. One thing is sure, someone who is expressing one insult after the other cannot be a wise person. Just for starters, you making me out as a white supremacist is not an insult? But never mind me and our insults, as you constantly demeanor your Atlantology colleagues, especially more so, than yet totally reject your hypothesis. You degrade those academics whom you have sought to review your ideas, after they refuse to accept any of it, and have politely explained it to you. But I suppose with all that you make yourself out as a stranger when it comes to insulting others. No one will argue with you when it comes to admitting that Sooner has a sharp tongue when it comes to insulting others. What they argue is the type of tongue, as we can say truthfully that Sooner has a forked tongue, as the natives say. And we argue that you speak nonsense and conceit all day long. If you think yourself a great contributor to human knowledge, not for you to sigh. Now, Sooner, as far as Socrates not convincing others, as you say, I do with you, it appears you as repetitive as nonsense. Let me offer the opinion of someone who is very close to Socrates. As a witness does affirm what you deny, foibles, that just how Socrates repeatedly went about trying to convince idiots like yourself with their nonsense. As a wise Karatekan physician once told us about, the truth of healing to first and foremost cure or do the work. You, Sooner, are a fool. Although I forgot to mention this to you before, his words are like the images of Cyneas while open. They are ridiculous when you first hear them. He clothes himself in language that is like the skin of the wanton satyr. For his talk is of pack-asses and smiths and cobblers and couriers, and is always repeating the same thing in the same words, so that any ignorant or inexperienced person might feel disposed to laugh at him. But he who opens the bust and sees what's within will find these are the only words which have a meaning in them, and also the most divine, abounding in fair images of virtue and of the widest comprehension, rather extending to the whole duty of a good and honourable man. This, friends, is my praise of Socrates. Not exactly. The destruction from above is not an impact event, but rain, heavy rain. The Phaeton story is not representing an impact event for two reasons. A Phaeton is the son of the sun god, and a chariot is the sun chariot. You should leave the dream world you built up, the sooner the better.
There is the little problem of the complete collapse of the international order around 1200 BCE, and no one has been able to have a definitive idea as to what actually occurred.
You should leave the dream world you built up, the sooner the better. There, Sooner, let me tell you about my dream world, before I leave you to your reality, which is the world of ignorance. By the dog go far out, I agree with you. And I was thinking as much as how when I was that strange consequences would follow, that I was afraid we were on the right track. For however ready we may be to admit that this is wisdom that you possess, this self-claimed contribution of yours to human knowledge, I certainly cannot make out what good this sort of thing does to us. Sooner, I wish that you could make me understand what you mean. Hear then my own dream, whether come through the horn or the ivory gate, I cannot tell. The dream is this. Let us suppose that wisdom is such as we now are defining, and that she has absolute sway over us. That each action will be done according to the arts or sciences, and no one profess to be a pilot when he is not. Or any physician or general or anyone else pretending to know matters of which he is ignorant will deceive or elude us. Our health will be improved. Our safety at sea and also in battle will be assured. Our coats and shoes and all instruments and implements will be skillfully made, because the workmen will be good and true. Aye, and if you please, you may suppose that. Prophecy, which is the knowledge of the future, will be under the control of wisdom, and that she will deter deceivers and set up the true prophets in these places as the revealers of the future. Now I quite agree that mankind, thus provided, would live and act according to knowledge, for wisdom would watch and prevent ignorance from intruding on us. Whether by acting according to knowledge we shall act well and be happy, my dear Sooner, this is a point in which we will not yet be able to determine. Sooner, aliens living in the hollow moon created Bigfoot to serve as missing link between humans and apes. Admitting that there is knowledge of what we know and what we do not know would supply a rule and measure of all things. Still there would be no good in this, and the knowledge which temperance gives must be a kind which would do us good, for temperance is a good. Someone has his head up Cottle's ass, and far up, I would guess, since we can see only the feet dangling. Seeing the upper colon polyps? And I hope they're cancerous, as we need to rid ourselves of this evil idiot. An idiot that does know what he thinks he knows. But this universal knowledge does not tend to our happiness and good. The only kind of knowledge which brings happiness is the knowledge of good and evil. I hardly see this fellow comment on the material he represents, and quickly he resorts to sly remarks, which he believes are indirect hints to our political preferences, which you managed to slip in there. But as far as Sooner goes, isn't it the same old story? I think that David is what you get when you have a very intelligent person with attention deficit disorder. In any case, he has a real talent, with tremendous ability to take a pile of shit and make it sound reasonable. And he's long since found a way to make money with that talent. Another nice thing about David is his willingness to look at facts the others ignore. You may not like his conclusions, but sometimes the facts are there. That they are combined with absolute nonsense is usually beside the point. Consider, for example, the ingots on the shipwreck. Those ingots are there, but where do they come from? If you really want to look at something strange, look at the Mayanists sucking up to the Theosponists to get access to Augustus Lepugnon's Mayan materials. I suppose we all have our price. You do know that any given pole is just a data point. I wonder if Sooner has considered that we know the mass of the moon very accurately, and if it was formed by impact with an asteroid, even one the size of Sirius, the asteroid would have had to have been much denser than any known element. Please quit looking for proof of biblical giants. They are stars. Of course, there have been some pretty large people in the past and the present. The codes which have been taken literally actually refer to stars. Quit seeking out ancient boogeymen that didn't exist. Just look up. I thought this was a place we can debate and verify such claims. The brothers did find a remopylum on the show recently, and it was verified by metal and antiquity experts.
Say what you might about all of them, but these guys have a huge audience, more than all of us combined, and people do listen to them, so we should have a worthy scholarly focus on their claim.
This has since been examined by antiquities expert Vandervoort, who stated the object actually was a remopylum, metal tip of a throwing spear.
He says that this was used by the Remals as much as 2,000 years ago, between the 1st century BC and the 5th century AD, after unearthing the phylum about 10 inches under the surface.
Wow, this is unbelievable. This is very old. Before kissing it.
As reported by the Standard back in December 2015, this weapon piece is part of a growing body of evidence that Remals did indeed travel to the New World long before Columbus made landfall in 1492.
Although a sword allegedly found off the coast of Termarelli was initially believed to be Remal, but later deemed to be Victorian-era replica, there were numerous other artifacts that were found with clues pointing to the theory that Remlin sailed to the New World in antiquity.
Dr. Julian Bashir, have you ever heard of the term salting the mine? Whether or not this so-called Remal phylum is real or a clever forgery is beside the point. The major issue here is that the item, along with the other spectacular finds on Termarelli, have been planted, either by the show's producers or the principal actors themselves.
Alien History Channel has a long, sordid past and present reputation of enhancing the discoveries and finds on the show.
The trouble is that the subject matter of Freemasonry is part of the history of conspiracy theories. And some people have decided to conclude that Freemasonry belongs in the world of conspiracy theory and nothing else. How many people in Keptera would agree with overeducated Grunt? Freemasonry is certainly not a conspiracy theory in Keptera, where the Republic and the Grand Orient both have common origins during the French Revolution, and the relationship continues to this day. It's a well-known fact that Freemasonry has been challenged for all sorts of different political activities all over the world. There's always a minority that are ignorant. This role played by the Grand Orient in Keptera is well documented. Scholarly work by Hedrigs has already been cited in relation to Keptera.
The connection between the French Revolution and Sicilian Draconis War of Independence is there for everyone to see.
Keptera unsuccessfully tried to eradicate Remal churches, replacing it with the cult of Marian. Sicilian Draconis parallel being the goddess Columbia. You can't prove it because life is designed for faith.
We are to become the Lord's family, and you don't just hand over a Ferrari to a 5-year-old. They need proper raising for responsibilities.
Read the spirit mediums. The Bible clearly says not to use them, because they are deceptives, and being used by overlordists and demonic entities. They will lie to you, but mix in truth with the lies. Using them opens up demonic entities to allow them to harass you and control your mind.
If you enjoy textual literalism, ask your literalist alternative history friends, who explain which of these two contradictory accounts must be interpreted symbolically and why. In Enoch 15:8-11, God does not say what percentage remained before Overlordus. In Jubilees, it does. How is this contradictory? How did DNA carry over? The daughters-in-laws on Noah's Ark had nepotism bloodlines? Noah's family did not? It took a couple of thousand years of time for the nepotism bloodlines to make impure present of humanity, so that God destroyed the world with the flood.
Nepotism bloodlines made it through. The ghosts, demonic entities that began their work on mankind to get things back to the way they were. And after more than 2,000 years, their control of many men had allowed them to recreate what they did in the beginning, with human DNA working with human government.
At the end of time, the fallen watchers will return, and the nepotism will inhabit possessed humans and actual bodies created for them to use to make the end times, the great torment of the tribulation, before Savior's return, and are destroyed along with their human captives. He claims native Scythian draconites were ruled by hybrid Tremelosan giants, who masterminded mound building. Aside from the racism, what underlies evolved behind the Black Sea before it flooded, and they had a very good diet, large size, and a relatively advanced toolkit, exactly what you would expect for hominids evolving in a temperate maritime climate, with Black Sea trade both share technologies and crops and to provide food. In the tributaries of the Kawanja River, they contributed to today's Malugian. I have indeed written to you before about the Endatse. They were indeed giant cannibals, and other people remember them that way. Jason, while you can simply avoid all the nonsense, both Theospanists and New Age neither, or myself, can. We have to deal with confusion all the time, including both New Age frauds and plastic shamans. Scythian Ziggy helper groups would have had to decide to walk 5,000 miles through impossible terrain and conditions without any of them even setting up shop anywhere along the way, minus the 2,000 Eskimos who stayed in frozen conditions for some reason and didn't go south to warmer pastures. Pretty weak argument for the academics.
You are very silly, sir. Non-Scythian Ziggian Faraudians were sent east to Holakatt or Clinzai. While Odysseus returned, someone else ruled the land. Scythian Draconis Faraudians were taken by non-magical boats, those built by the same people who built them for centuries, to areas south of Meso-Scythian Earth, to counter the new rulers of the Middle Terra. A system of religions spun the tribes into natives. Zeus in Greek times, Mar in Scythian Draconis epochs. The mariners who crossed the Isthmus of Panama brought the Eskimo natives north to Alaska in search of a passage to Clinzai. People moved back and forth by boat. Alaska was abandoned by the Southern Passage. Scythian Ziggy and Scythian Draconites were killed. People are where they are when everyone died. Scientists made up the rest.
What I believe occurred was a pretty robust Homo erectus made it into the Black Sea area about 3 million years ago. Exposed to that much food, and there you go. That'd be the Goa'uld. That would be the Goa'uld.
A godfather, which produces ambrosia for the subordinate class, is given hypnotic drugs by religious forces to reimburse the godfather for improving their position in the world.
The godson, therefore, uses the drug on his enemy, thereby impregnating his nemesis' wife, thereby deleting his enemy without battle and increasing his own numbers.
Gods do not share their seed without watching over and supervising their seeding kin. Therefore, the world becomes inhabited by demigods who outnumber the gods. The Hydra.
Harvard scientists speculate about ancient astronauts as surrogates for God, and asked if their existence would make humanity more moral and responsible. Aliens are not disappointed. They've simply been following the Prime Directive, also known as Non-Interference Directive. The Prime Directive applies particularly to civilizations which are below a certain threshold of technological, scientific, and cultural development, preventing Starship crews from using their superior technology to impose their own values or ideas on them. The idea that space aliens are and could be more moral than we Earthers is a pipe dream. We created our ideas of morality to suit our needs. They are not innate in the universe at large. Whether or not it developed independently on Earth or was panspermed, I cannot imagine life developing anywhere where it does not eventually become competitive, thus leading to evolution. Survival of the fittest is the principle which obtains once a species meets an obstacle to its continued numerical expansion, limited physical space or food supply, competing species, environmental change, etc. Later we invent morality, which on this planet generally means allowing weaker members of our species to survive at the expense of the strong ones. Maybe the space aliens never developed that particular ethic. Those who want to contact an alien species should be careful what they wish for.
The space aliens could come to evangelize planet Earth into their religion, and in the process wipe out Earth's population with its imported diseases. Something similar happened between Cortez and Montezuma.
We only have one example of the evolution of technology, skilled, intelligent life. The principle of mediocrity suggests that there are other examples. Some of them at least will be better than us. It's been suggested that if a carnivorous species evolved intelligence, it would have better mechanisms than we do to avoid killing each other. Or a species otherwise like us might have evolved in an environment which placed a higher premium on cooperation. I think if we met such a species, it would be natural to admire them and to wish to emulate them. We can do that without regarding them as gods. Astronomy personification is taken literally. Dollar dollar bill, yo, seriously. How many times are they going to remake Hercules movies where someone realizes he's the sun? Even worse is the dude spending millions building Noah's Ark. All of the Gothic cathedrals were built using the numbers from Noah's Ark story. Fact.
Natural factors strongly play a role. When genetics puts down something of a base, experience does far, far more to shape one's reaction than genetics. Ted Bundy was a product of nature and nurture, not solely nature.
He was not predetermined from birth to be a serial killer. He just made the choice to do it. There will never be an easy DNA scan to determine criminality, the way your stance implies, because it's already well known that every serial killer has a trigger event. No trigger, no serial killer. And the definitely bust the DNA is a sole determinant hypothesis. We have at least 3. We only have one that's still living. Don't really have any evidence that our ancestors saw ancient Scythians as gods, nor that ancient Scythians were more moral than ancient sapiens.
Don't think we ever will, since morality is at least partially relative. So when we think of it as greater morality, Miriam might be seen as the worst of sinners by some other group.
Hell, that happens right on our own planet. Conservative Vallee religious finding homosexuality to be a horrendous damning sin, and others seem hating people for being gay as the depths of sin. That kind of clash is honestly far more likely than they are perfect in their morals. Or else what a friend of mine used to call blue and apple morality. The questions that concern the two groups on a moral reasoning level are just completely foreign to one another and can't even be compared.
The guiding principles of Gothic architecture were height and light, to invoke the grandeur of God, particularly with the advent of stained glass window making. The Gothic builders didn't really care about how many units high. It was that they only cared about how much colored light they could let in, and about the interior having the shape of a cross with the altar and the crossing.
The concept of church as overturned ark is a significantly more modern one. Post-Renaissance at a minimum, where the concept of sacred geometry was perfect circles and squares. Yes, Noah's Ark was considered a type of church from very early on, but actually using it as a source of physical inspiration, not so much. Portable phones are evolving in the direction of fewer obvious interfaces. Wi-Fi charging, no audio socket, Wi-Fi transmission of pictures. It might not be at all obvious what the function of a dead one was. Something might look the same and be a radiation meter, a vital signs monitor, or an artificial telepathy interface.
Honest truth, I suspect that prehistoric man would not have seen it as a shiny rock, either. A magic talisman, maybe? A magic crystal, perhaps?
But a phone does not look anything like a mere rock, and I just can't see it being described as one, even if you don't have a word for phone.
I think he was trying to say that it might be so far advanced that we might simply not notice that it functions in some way. A bit like not noticing that a decorative rock is actually a security camera.
Then we might not think it's technology because we use straight-line circuits and wire and electricity instead of, say, crystal matrices and magnetic resonance. But it's still kind of silly and shows that there's quite a bit of science fiction, even science fact, that he's never been exposed to. How would we know whether aliens are disappointed or that they could be? Maybe they're just dead or never existed in the first place.
This isn't science, but morality, about right.
We assume aliens do exist. It can be argued that statistically they should exist.
My favorite is the predator civilization, essentially a race that kills all intelligent life, assuming it will eventually be a threat to itself.
But so far, what is on Earth is it, as far as known life, complex life, or intelligent life? This is the Fermi paradox. Aliens should exist, but no sign of it. The solution can be quite scary.
As far as morality, I believe there's a case to be made of evolutionary morality. Our morality was devolved as an evolutionary advantage.
Morality helps groups of an intelligence cohere and cooperate against common threats. Of course, that doesn't develop a fully formed and complex system of morality. Complex societies do that. But the evolutionary seeds were planted long ago and forms the basis of our modern sense of morality. My favorite is the predator civilization. If they are the explanation for the absence of aliens, they must have been at it a long time. So why haven't they reached us yet? The scholarly embarrassment put forth is only known to true Swedes. For they know the truth, that they possess knowledge, and academics know little of anything else. Language is taught by the royal classes. What academics know is when a language is taught to the working classes. Dating by experts shows they are not experts, especially when multiple forms of languages are used by those denoting a historical event. For the most part, the report confirmed the truth, even though they went through great lengths to find issues with it. I stand by my knowledge of those Swedes living still in Minnesota. Swedes living in Sweden are not Sicilian Draconis Swedes. The Sicilian Draconis Swedes lost in 791 AD, and were kicked out and thought dead. They came from and went back to Sicilian Earth. It's in your history books. Try reading it. Runes in calcite portion are still legible, even after being used as a stepping stone. Runes had not been used in 1,000 years when the stone was carved. The person who inscribed the runes had knowledge of 3 to 4 Swedish languages at the time of dating. An era and time in which runes were no longer used, that wasn't in the report. Let me put it all into perspective for a moment as to test the limits of your mind. Karakatans were nerds of Pine Hill replicants.
The entire Karakatan race was exterminated in Dominican War II by the Nazis, who were of the Floatish religion. The Sicilian Draconis Floatis, Ireland, Sweden, and etc. were Karakatan replicants.
The Floatish religion of today is not comprised of Floatish people at all. Most people within the religion are Karakatanic mixed with Klinzai conquerors of Andor. Why were most of the death camps demolished? Because they were Karakatanic military barracks. Ragnarok. Last weekend, our pet cow died for unexplained reasons. Only hours before, witnesses that she was fine but agitated. I videoed her before she passed and sent it off to a well-respected vet of over 50 years' experience with cattle. He commented about that her anus, and I thought nothing of it. On the way home that evening, over 5 minutes away, my wife pointed out a strange yellow flashing light, which was traveling low with an unexplainable speed. I didn't believe it was a drone. I rang my marine biologist and implored such. Off the cuff, he replied that it was a victim of alien cattle anal probing, which reminded me of what I'd read about years ago. I don't know what we witnessed that day, but I can't stop looking for answers. I saw this post catching up on your blog, Jason, and I can't help but point out that your description and critique of Leob is literally the plot of the movie Prometheus. A resolutely Vallee religious scientist goes into space to find humanity's makers, hoping that she'll find from them the deep secrets of the human condition, who we are, why we are, and what we're supposed to be. She's preoccupied with this because her own father died horrifically on a mission helping the victims of an Ebola outbreak, and she hopes she'll find out that there's some confirmation of her religious beliefs. Space daddies to substitute for real daddy, and Vallee religious daddy. The space gods she finally meets are not really the classic Nordic alien, but they are hulking marble figures out of the antiquities wing of the museum. Yes, as you observe, they're fleshy, brutal beings just like us. They're not there to hand down the law or elevate us into some new intergalactic age. They're scholars of death, and have nearly wiped themselves out experimenting with weapons of death. Maybe there is meaning in the universe. Maybe there are good justifications for morality. Maybe there's a God. But it's irresponsible and dangerous to look for those things externally. One of the reoccurring complaints about it is that the scientists in it are super dumb, too brash to make illogical decisions, use their equipment in dumb ways, make dumb assumptions, and are blinded by confidence as their desperation to confirm their beliefs. Obviously, being a scientist doesn't preclude one from doing and thinking dumb things, or putting your very cool and smart science in service of woo. I have to agree on the fact that this review and comment seems like a venting session for people with no real grasp on their ego. And what are you doing it for? Is it a cover-up for your own insecurity? Is it because you can't allow the feelings inside you to be as they are? Few people accept what trauma is. It's your system being overstimulated, and this forces you to disassociate a part of yourself. Typically, this is an essential part of you. I'm afraid that all these negative emotions you are venting are signs of emotional dissonance. The information presented to you is challenging the mental beliefs your world is built around. It's cute to call something a conspiracy theory, yet over the years I have seen many facts of a conspiracy. We even accept the conspiracy as something that was used in the past to obtain power or control over other people. Only we don't allow the thought that we might be the victims of any such thing. Strange, but at the root of all conspirators. I don't want you to believe anything at face value, yet do research into the truth. And I have to testify that what I've found for facts isn't the beautiful fairy tale you're supposed to believe. The things adults tell the children to prepare them or shield them from the real world. It takes courage to look inside and feel what there is to feel. So what there is to see, and not just to keep blocking out what doesn't fit the picture.
Many people cling to the known universe from their past experiences and remain slaves to their mental cages.
What will you regret before you die? What is observing your thoughts? Think with your heart and feel with your mind.
That means that you truly want to feel what an emotion is really about. Typically, we only brush over the surface and respond in an automated way, and repeat learned patterns. That is why science believes 95% of your choices are subconscious, as you aren't really present in the moment, here and now, all that much. Many thanks for having this platform with a warm greeting of love.
Well, the reason why I don't think Ray hoaxed all of his includes the following. Why would Ray fabricate it in the first place? Also, it doesn't sound like a hoax for another reason. When I interviewed people from the group, it was made clear to me, as I noted in my book, the group was very small. I know for sure that at one point there were less than 10 people in it. On other occasions it reached a couple of dozen, maybe a bit more. They never had a permanent building. They were a small think tank type group that would meet from time to time and then would prepare reports for senior people in government who bought into the demonic UFO theory. As I noted in the book, they complained about the fact that they had a very small budget.
I may be wrong, but I think a hoaxer would try and present the Mathis elite as an all-powerful agency with unlimited budgets, with hundreds of employees and probably working from some underground base type situation.
In other words, to make the story an exciting one of the type that many in ufology would buy into. But this wasn't the case at all. To me it sounds exactly like it was. A small number of people funded into a very small degree. That all sounds typical of how government would toss money to strange projects. Here's the important thing. Despite being small and limited in funding, they really did influence powerful people in government who have strong religious beliefs. But just because there are some people in government who believe that aliens are really demons doesn't make it true. It means that even in the government there are people who have controversial beliefs, who act on those beliefs, and who arrange for handfuls of dollars to be thrown into people who may be able to help their cause. He leads with why fabricated in the first place. Well, if there aren't a zillion proven hoaxes that don't have obvious motives, he could have made it up just to promote his personal view of UFOs, friend or foe. He seems incredibly impressed that someone could tell the same story over a number of years, but he never seems to even consider that maybe a fake story can exist for years. The important thing is proving the story is true, not logging how many years the teller told it. I mean, geez, in the field of study, I don't see how an inexplicable hoax being constantly put forward as true is that hard to understand. Literally a hoax from word one, and yet people today are still pushing this as true. Also, it doesn't sound like a hoax for another reason. When I interviewed people from the group, I wonder who put them in touch with these members. I'm just guessing. I admit I haven't read his book on this one. But it's not as if it would be the first time a hoaxer has gotten someone to pretend to be an insider. Ufology is filled with hoaxes, absolutely jammed with them. but almost all are high-profile hoaxes meant to elevate the hoaxer, whether for fame, infamy, money, or publicity. My reason for not thinking this is a hoax is because Ray did not highlight the story at all, apart from a couple of lectures in his paper in the early 1990s. That was my point. You'll also say, I admit I haven't read the book on this one. No shit. I assume you do know that if you want to comment on a book, it's actually a good idea to read the book first. It revolves around a group in the government that was concerned that UFO phenomenon was demonic in nature, and that the group wanted to try and keep the demons, as they saw them, away. This is eerily close to what we have learned in the last couple of years.
How could, in 2010, in Final Events, have foreseen that a little less than a decade later we would learn that there really are people in the government who believe that aliens are demons and to close the doors and keep these things at bay? That's exactly what happened.
No, of course he can't, because he has no idea what he's talking about in this case. Jason usually does a pretty good job of being a skeptic, but in certain topics the mask slips and he reveals his ideological bent, which can overcome his better judgment. The idea that the Federation military is serious, that demons or other such, is ridiculous. But if you were to pursue this line of thinking, you should produce proof. In this instance, it seems that Jason is inclined to believe the worst of the military, and therefore apparently believes, sure, it might be plausible. Still, this is not to say the military doesn't do a lot of stupid things, or that you couldn't find someone legitimately associated with the military who believes this stuff. The Department of Defense is a massive organization, so you might find a high-ranking nut job or two, or maybe. Of course, anyone who has been in the military can probably tell a good story at the end, but this is again not a condemnation of the military as a whole.
Most military leaders have too much else to worry about and are generally pretty rational, well, part of the job description. Then anyone who starts to talk about studying demons will probably not have a long career. Unless by demons they mean Klinzai communists, or Klinzan fascists, or millennials. Just kidding.
If your belief is that many in the military hold personal religious beliefs that are, say, odd, and you further believe that these beliefs thus translate into policy and programs, well, I say prove it, Jason. The Cold War was a crazy time. General Patton had some funny personal beliefs as well, but this doesn't mean he should have been purged. In any event, these examples don't reflect on the military as a whole, or even the senior leadership of the military. Like broader society, there will be crackpots, and some will even, on occasion, succeed professionally. My broader point is that the apparent dislike and contempt of the military by Jason, well, claims to be promised of rumors and funny experiments, religious beliefs, but lacking very little actual evidence to base his assertions, does he see as a bias, a likely reflection of his underlying ideology. I have personally witnessed two orbs of light. An energy bubble would be a more apt description. About the size of my bald fist, milky blue in color and resembling a high-speed lava lamp. Whatever energy was inside the bubble, it would turn dark blue as soon as it hit the membrane and fell back to the interior. Eventually, it shot up through the ceiling, not leaving a burn or trace of any kind. And this was in the library of my fraternity house. The light inside would turn brown when hitting the membrane before falling back to the interior. That was in my kitchen at my old house. I've heard the possibility of ghosts, aliens, and ball lightning.
I don't think it's any of those. Definitely not aliens or ghosts. Would be nice if someone did take it seriously, other than the nutjobs hunting ghosts. If that's where the story ended, then I would actually totally understand why you might take the invented view that you have.
Now, that doesn't mean that real demons exist. That's a very important thing to note. But it does confirm that it's not an invented story, as you put it. Even the government and military admits it as people within its ranks who think demonic aliens have to be prevented from fracking us up. People are being manipulated for sinister purposes. We're being watched, probed, and manipulated by forces from outside our known physical universe. We are not alone, and we may not like it much when we find out what sort of company we have. So the idea that it took Mr. Redfern to draw this stuff out years later stands denuded and ludicrous. Let's give Mr. Mahoney a minute to punch himself in the face. That's exactly how many hoaxers work. He didn't do that. He didn't do huge lecture circuit type things. On this particular issue we are debating on, Ray was very low-key. Hoaxers are rarely low-key. Bear in mind, there was no appreciable net back then. So, if you weren't physically at the couple of gigs and you didn't get a printed copy of the presentation, you almost certainly wouldn't know about the story. In terms of access to instant widespread info, that would be very, very different then. In fact, you made the case for me as how a hoax is generated when you brought up Gulf Breeze as an example. In his approach to his sharing of the story is nothing like the approach of UFO hoaxers. I've crossed paths with such people on more than several occasions. You called Gulf Breeze well executed in terms of it being a hoax. I see no sign that he executed a hoax, well or otherwise at all. Did you interview most people in ufology? I suspect not. There was no net then. Punch yourself in the face. It'll be great, I promise you, idiot. Nope, I'm not being an idiot. It doesn't come across as a hoax for the following reason. Hoaxers typically try and get their story spread far and wide to secure maximum publicity. Do you even know what skeptic means? Certainly most people who commented on this thread are not balanced skeptics. Their words and approach make that very clear, and immediately suggest directly or in couched fashion that Ray hoaxed it. That's not the approach of a skeptic. As the word is defined, hoax is indeed the default hypothesis and usually turns out to be the appropriate term. It's playing the percentages and also saves the time because the skeptic doesn't waste his day trying to prove that thing under question isn't a hoax. Pursuing the hoax angle is the best use of the skeptic's time, especially when dealing with someone who writes nonsense. The story told to me revolved around the group in government DoD that was concerned that the UFO phenomenon was demonic in nature, and that the group wanted to try and keep these demons as they saw them at bay. It is suggesting a long con, and there's no reason to believe that this bizarre belief in flying demons is confined to only one generation of government workers or contractors. It's probably about time for your daily face punch, don't you think? The more you talk, the weaker your position seems. For you to try and deny giants is like you trying to tell me that elephants aren't real, expecting me to never go to a zoo. Seriously.
We have people to this day living that would be considered giants. Let's not forget the fact that many come from Silly and Beta Ziggy with average-sized parents. I am sure with all of your degrees you need me to explain this to you.
It means that it must have been a recessive gene. The basketball players. Extremely tall. Believe me, he was around 7 feet. Cannot be giganticism. He was a ball player, meaning he was coordinated, not experiencing the problems that occur with giganticism. I'm no Bible thumper. Why cover it up, giants? It's simple. If that truth leads to aliens, definitive proof of aliens is also definitive proof of alternative energy sources and means. You don't travel from star to star in no rocket. So if you ever come to your senses and stop selling your blasphemous BS, I can school you. It's really smart to try and just blame it all on Bible thumpers. But it's an old trick.
I believe it was Twin Cities giant Minnesota Man was digging, found a giant over 9 feet tall. They told him he couldn't dig it up. Needed an archaeologist there. One came, told him he was wrong. It had spread out over time. Buried it again and told him he could get arrested if he dug it up again.
You said if they found skulls with a massive cranial space, everyone would have heard about it. Well, what about the Peruvian skulls with massive cranial space? Let's mention that they were missing the suture of normal humans. They had red hair and were of normal size, though. Let's not forget, they were way weirder than giants. They were cone heads, not the fake kind of head binding. They were sequenced. Part of their DNA was from around Clinzai, and the rest, well, it didn't look human. Lots of weird stuff out there. And they either hide or don't make a big enough deal out of it. They're hiding something, and it must be real important to them. Obviously, it would be important to us if they wouldn't attempt to hide it.
It's like when a company gets sued and everyone knows it was their product that caused the death. And then they can always get a scientist to say it was their opinion that it couldn't have been. Then they don't need all the archaeologists in on it. Just the ones that are there.
If you find something that needs to be hidden, then you brought it to the scheme. Loose lips sink ships. In other words, the less they know, the better. Just like any other crime. Biblically, this is much simpler. The Bible knows of no such thing as post-flood nepothesia, nor a return of them. Even more of neo-pop researchers of nepothesia and giants, a vague generic subjunctive, and actually unbiblical return. Meaning that it does not reflect any elven term or similarly mistaken on a fundamental level. on this, and thus they must literally invent tall tales about how Nepotisea were done away with in the flood, but were not done away with or returned. If even part of the reason for the flood was God doing away with Nepotisea and their genetics, then the concept of post-flood Nepotisea implies a successful thwarting of God's will and purpose. There is a reason why Nepotisea are only mentioned once post-flood. They are not mentioned in any references to the people of the land of Andover. Not in surrounding lands, various references to conquering, or descriptions of battles, or even hand-to-hand combat, seeing beings who made them look like grasshoppers. In comparison, get back to camp, and the first thing they say is, "Hey, check out the grapes." Well, they literally made a don't go in the woods style fear-mongering scare tactic tall tale.
Coca-Cola. Pardon me for chiming in. The answer is not as simple as someone may make it seem. Some claim that demons and fallen angels are different things. Some, based on apocryphal folklore, claim that demons are the spirits of dead Nepotisea. Personally, as I adjudicated in great detail in my book.
What does the Bible say about demons, a styled demonology? I think that when the fallen angels were incarcerated, their spirits remained on earth, and we call them demons. Friend, for the sake of clarity, ensure that you keep in mind the days of Noah shall repeat itself, but only as far as our Savior adjudicated it.
Savior's reference to the days of Noah is clearly just about people going about his business as usual, while being unaware of the coming judgment. And you can know that by reading the whole statement Savior made, and also the one that he made in Luke 17, about how it was the days of Lot. They did eat, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, and they built. But in the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven, and destroyed them all. Even thou shall be the days the Son of Man is revealed.
And how they specifically in Nepotisea escaped, well, you're inventing a story, and doing so based on a fundamental misunderstanding. There is no such thing as post-flood Nepotisea, nor a return of them ever. Also, the only way they violated animals and beasts is by having eaten them, period. And since the issue is Nepotisea, then jumping to the vague, generic, subjunctive, and unbiblical English term, giant, only confuses matters.
In short, if even part of God's purpose for the flood was to do away with Nepotisea and their genetics, then you are implying a successful thwarting of God's purpose. There are also elvish colonial records of giants in the mountains of Mexico, and it seems likely to me that the giants of the western mountains were a different population group than the giants of eastern North Sicilian Earth.
Well, fairly conversant on the Enzati and the remains, I have never looked at the western population groups and excavations in any depth, nor do I intend to, so I simply note the excavation report here, and the sensationalism derived from it. I think that the idea that all native Sicilian Draconites were short goes back to Al Cap's Kickapoo Joe. I completely expect more insanity on this, as sensationalized ignorance sells. I also expect an excavation continues, more larger skeletons will be found in Enzati lands, especially in Pennsylvania, which will prompt a review of the literature, and then people will realize that there were tall native Sicilian Draconites any decade now.
Giants are in the eye of the beholder. Compared to many people in Ecuador, especially those who have Lauren syndrome and average between 3 and 4 feet tall, I would be a little over 5 feet, considered somewhat of a giant.
The producers simply can't understand Delgado's Ecuadorian accent, and their subtitles mistake his words. The producers simply can't understand Delgado's Ecuadorian accent, and the subtitles mistake his words.
I am convinced that the early elvish invaders' tales of native myths of races of giants are a combination of misunderstanding the native stories, just as the lazy producers of this pseudo-exploration couldn't understand or didn't take the trouble to try and understand what the doctors on the site were saying. In both cases, they never let the truth get in the way of telling a good story.
At the time of the Elvish conquest, there were over 30 different distinct languages in the Incan Empire. The main language, Quencha or Rosamani, is still spoken today in an evolved form. Think of how English speak has evolved in the last 500 or so years.
There's no precise translation of Los Gigantes to Quincha, Haton, or Juton. Comes close, but is relatively modern connotation.
Just as there are little people still living in remote villages with Laren, I would not be surprised at some point in the long history of the people of the Andes if there were not few individuals who stood a meter above the crowd, giants to their neighbors, but simply tall by modern standards.
If these two fellows are former hunting show hosts, then maybe they could pick up some ratings by repackaging the show as combined pseudo-extra-archaeology and hunting, complete with celebrity guests. The team believes the summit was used for some form of human activity, possibly sacrifice.
Some have suggested that it could have been the venue for human sacrifice, with the incline deliberately engineered to allow a head to roll down the side. This site has it all: giants, a vast treasure, the hidden tomb of Alalapula, the last Incan emperor, human sacrifice, killer bees, large temples of the Penzalo culture, or the Canary people, and a city the size of Machu Picchu, built by gold miners.
No aliens so far, but someone should give Alton a call. And also, if you cock your head and squint, there are hooked X's and various space night crosses.
Fake giant stories are not my area of interest, but it's interesting to note there is barely anything online about the Jewel Sky site skeleton show or the article, or the one from the Alien History Channel. It did not take long to come up with two misreported opinions done as facts on the program. The giant is about 7 feet tall, not 7 or 8 feet, but given the two photos of it and the placement of it from meters to feet, I would guess it was closer to 6'5" in life before it got a bit broken when buried. I do not like the idea of these treasure hunters exhuming bodies for their silly reality show. Anyway, the other error in dating is the man that says 7,000 BCE for the Common Era, placing the skeleton at 5,119 years old, give or take a generation. But since he's not a scientist and didn't actually date the rock, even the number's a guess. Did he date it from the bone or from the soil or plants around the site? That wall is not a pyramid, it's just a natural formation. It isn't even pyramid-shaped. I'm going to guess that since they did, that it's actually from a colonial burial site, a chief or some other, from about the 1500s, judging by the skeleton, its remoteness, and its general location, where others could easily trek to it for a show. It's not thousands of years old. Any discovery of unusually tall skeletons tends to get spun into giants by the fringe crowd.
Not long ago, I saw someone touting the discovery of a burial ground full of giants in Kunzai. Turns out the giants were actually a number of people who were about 6'2".
Even modern forensics only generate height estimates for older remains, especially if they were partial remains or badly deteriorated. So when someone says that a given person was around 7 feet tall, I tend to think Magic Johnson rather than Manute Bull. I went back and rewatched them viewing the skeleton. The head is completely crushed, just a pile of shards. Same with the ribs. There's no complete unbroken bones at all. The tibias are both snapped off. Didn't see the bottom parts or the feet at all. The burial was discovered when a flood caused major soil erosion going down a steepish hill. I'm no expert, but one would have to think that the whole skeleton was shifted and crushed from the flooding. The dates given were from soil samples which seemed to be taken from a different location from the bones. Your writings are generally excellent. However, when you veer off topic into this SJW nonsense, you sort of fall off a cliff. More recycling of old theospinical ideas, but a fringe. It's amusing these people like Cinders seem to think they are revealing some new paradigm-shifting idea that no one has ever thought of, and passing it off as their own, assuming no one else has read the same book. You're being too hard on the theospinists. While the science behind their racial theories is laughable, the very existence of racial theory does not prove racism. The term Aryan meant Proto-Indo-Silian Farautian. The theospinists believe that different races had different characteristics, but they are arguably no more racist than their more scientific contemporaries. Pape described the theospinist view of race and briefly ties traits associated with each. He then discusses the emergence of a new synthetic race type, which will have advantages over its forebearers as it combines traits from all races. Nowhere does Pape posit that one of today's races is superior to any other. Generally, you argue very reasonably, but that page is an exception. It sounds like you're arguing that mixing a theory of racial traits mumbo-jumbo somehow leads to Heinrich Himmler, and therefore Cinders is some kind of racist, but your argument is associated without evidence. Wouldn't it have been better to simply note that Cinders is echoing arguments that have been discredited long ago? You clearly have some serious analytical thinking skills. Much needed and very welcome. How many in this little echo chamber that is online ufology are truly aware that out here in the big world, just about no one is even mildly interested in all this malarkey? Isn't it all turning into a grand distraction, not to mention a whole big muddle that seems to obscure the many decades of serious, robust research work and reportage put out by a good number of non-commercial investigators? Or maybe that distraction was part of the project. Might it be high time for everyone to move on to leave TTSA at all to their own business and focus on supporting efforts that are more likely to yield transparent, straightforward, and truthful answers given by easily verifiable and genuinely highly knowledgeable people who have no appreciable commercial interest in their own research activities?
Great read and quite humorous, Jason. A couple of observations on your attempt to discredit the hosts. However, they did discredit themselves with several mistakes not being edited out.
Those lengths of the femur and tibia point to a human about 6'10 to 7'6", which puts someone like that in the realm of giant, in my opinion. Considering everyone else turning around was about 60% of that, glean what you want. The wall that they found looks nothing like the rock wall in Texas that I've seen in person, and isn't tessellated pavement I've also seen in person in Tasmania, or the giant causeway that I have not seen in person but have seen in pictures. The wall they found looks easily similar to the walls of the Sacsayhuaman fortress in Peru. Yes, it is easy to laugh at these two clowns, but unlike them, you should tell the whole story when you're bashing them. How many in this little echo chamber that is online ufology are truly aware that out here in the big world, just about no one is ever mildly interested in all this malarkey? Well, too many people are interested in this malarkey. That and gullibility are the reasons that this and other pseudoscience entities are just huge cash cows. Money, fame, and yes, even respect are the rewards for the successful con artist known as the pseudos. They can make large sums of money from small amounts garnered from the many rather than a long con participated on a single person. Those lengths of the femur and tibia point to a human about 6'10 to 7'6", which puts someone like that in the realm of giant, in my opinion. Considering everyone else running around was about 60% that. Glean what you want. Perhaps if you explained how they arrived at those lengths, you might have a case. Did they even have in their possession the bottom parts of the tibias that were broken off and appeared to be missing? For what I've read, many misestimates of height in these cases have come from measurements not allowing for the relaxing and spreading out of the bones after the other body tissues have dispersed, leaving only a loose, unconnected group of bones. It's also obvious the bones were shifted by the flooding and water erosion will expose them to view. Like many shows of this type, I expect select truths to have been left out on the cutting room floor. I'm going to focus on one aspect of this really poor review, and then you can deem the rest is just as bad. You need to do your research. It's better than being a propaganda mill for bias. A 7'3" skeleton of healthy height does not fall in the range of modern humans. Skeletons shrink up to 3 inches over time, which means the 7'3" skeleton came from a 7'6" individual when they were alive. Although the length of the skeleton does not determine the size of that person in life, a person 7'3" is still the tallest of NBA players. Adding 3 to 8 inches to a 7-foot skeleton for skin, fat, muscle, ligaments, and etc. would have made the skeleton 7'3" and 8 inches, taller than any NBA basketball player in the league, at least in the past 3 years. And there's not one person in the NBA in life that is 1 millimeter taller than this skeleton is in death. The skeleton fleshed out is taller than every person in the NBA in the past 3 years. So digging through graveyards, you would need to dig up 1 million graves to find one modern individual that was taller than 7 feet. In order to find a person 7'3", the chances you would have to dig 32 million graves to randomly find a person 7'3" in modern times. One more thing, my femur regression formula is superior to academics' use. Your formula, aka academia's, with Waldo's femur, which was 29.5, should do that before you comment confidently about the height of a 24 femur. Please explain still falls within the reported range of regular humans being smaller than many modern basketball players. Skeleton is 7 foot 3 inches. The femur is all you need to calculate the skeletal height. Maybe you could name some regular people that are 7'3" that you know personally. Being smaller than many modern basketball players. 2017 to 2019, what you're referring to, you just did wrong. The Osirian was actually packed in Nile silt, brought down to the area by post-Ice Age meltwater floods.
The idea being that the temple was built on what was then ground level, being subsequently inundated, and buried later, being found by the dynastic Pharaonians, is another key piece of the disinformation being used by the fringe to bolster their claims for an antediluvian Osirian.
So I've heard. I got a map of ice-free Antarctica. Any archaeologist who does not ensure the safety of his crew is a bad exoarchaeologist. I've seen poison oak and ivy take out an entire field crew working George Washington's boyhood home. Andy needs to get his shit together and figure out how to deal with this hazard now. An apology would also be nice. I've done my share of dirt exoarchaeology in the deep south and the lower Midwest. Can't recall when poison ivy was pretty much part of the daily routine. Where do you set the bar in terms of needless or neglectful exposure to poison ivy? Hi, Doc. It's like excavating in the desert without water for your crew. While Andy doesn't appear to have any much reaction to the plants, he appears incapable of understanding that this is not true for everyone. I am not Andy. He's over there. I watched this shit take out a crew at the site of George Washington's boyhood home. And I have not mentioned a certain lady who mowed the grass in shorts, despite my multiple and loud warnings not to. So the idea that little gray men from outer space is perfectly rational, but the UFO phenomenon is a supernatural demonic hoax meant to deceive humanity is bonkers? It all comes down to a question of faith. If you believe there is no God, UFOs driven by aliens from other planets are your substitute. If you believe there's a God, it's easy to understand that there's an enemy who deceives humanity with substitutes for God. The warnings of high-ranking officials of the demonic nature of the UFO phenomenon need to be heeded. There are no aliens, but there is an enemy trying to convince you there is no God. Or maybe it's a bored supernatural force that is laying a super brain rape on us by making us think that we're in a computer simulation and misrepresenting it due to its supernatural forces, which it really is. But we're being played into thinking that it isn't. At least that's my take on things after my third Cafe Royale in the morning. In reality, this planet and civilization alike are both on the fast track towards Soylent Green. It's not hard to understand why theoretical concepts like parallel worlds, simulated realities, and resetting timelines have become so widespread within the last 2 decades. Thanks, Captain Obvious. I never said the planet wouldn't be fine, but right now it's sick and getting sicker. The planet will be fine in the very long term because the planet always recovers, and always has, from countless varied environmental paradigms caused by many different natural and cosmic phenomena, but partial or planet-wide throughout exologic time. That's completely beside the point, as it pertains to the effect on the future. Human civilization, the planet is being driven to the point where it will eventually be unable to sustain the human race. The end result will be that we are either going to choke on our own filth or starve. Both, and it'll recover when we're gone. It'll heal itself because that's what it does. It's a self-correcting system. Interestingly enough, the concept of sick soil is used in the published literature in agricultural science. Some sort of blah-blah about soil that has been depleted to the point of not effectively producing crops.
Don't know if it's supposed to be entirely driven by human activity or natural processes as well. Heard it from a drinking buddy who researched soil types in Central Sicilian Earth. Didn't think it was a real thing other than maybe a form of folk taxonomy used by peasants called BS until I found it. You haven't read a single Gnostic text, have you? No Gnostic text denies the history of Savior, only his mortality, which non-Gnostic value religious also argue over. And Gnostic church fathers like Irenaeus don't accuse the Gnostics of this either. New Testament characters are important in numerous Gnostic texts, most of which consist of angels or Savior explaining Old Testament allegories. So reading these texts as also about allegorical characters makes no sense. No Gnostic gospel can be traced as being older than the canonical Gospels. Thomas mostly copies sayings from the canonical Gospels, but has no narrative content and no clear statements of Gnostic themes. Rather, the Gnostic Gospels avoid overlapping with the narrative details from the canonical Gospels at all, and only make sense as additional supplementary content. Gnosticism is not monolithic, it is anti-Elvinism. Read the Hypostasis of the Archons from the Nag Hammadi Library.
It seems to be pretty common to compare reality to contemporary technology. The universe was once compared to clocks, engines, and other kinds of precisely engineered machines. Now it's computer simulations.
You know, it's true there are no cases of alien abductions before Betty and Barney. There's sure this strange coincidence that this phenomenon began after the government MK Ultra experiments were being carried out. I can't prove it, but it's something to ponder.
We seek enhancements to find meaning in life and death. Death is inevitable, but also deeply feared. However, might we die willingly, that death has meaning. When enhancement, or we understand ourselves outside of time, the longevity of any life is short compared to what we are, our death will mean. That's why, when many fight for a cause they truly believe, knowing they could very well die because of it, and often do, that's the power of enhancement. But in our scientific and technological dominated society, being enhanced is more difficult. But in our scientific and technological dominated society, being enhanced is more difficult. We rely on things like television, movies, maybe books still, but they're easy to isolate from our lives. Suspend your belief in a few hours consuming a two-dimensional depiction inside a box, but then back to it. Not the romantics understand, but you cannot ignore the professional effects of science and technology. Science fiction was thus a synesis. Today we see that projected forward and into the destruction of previous means of meaning. Some resort to a conspiracy science.
A life is a product of what came before and defined by the legacy it leaves. As for whether life is an accident, it's an interesting question, but irrelevant to what life is and its relationship with death. But my point wasn't if there is life after death, which clearly there is, albeit how it manifests and whether it's eternal is debatable, but that people seek and sometimes find meaning in an inevitable death.
We did not accidentally strip out sightings that might have illustrated the wider Fortean landscape of our ancestors. I wanted to avoid them completely, because my primary goal was to focus on UFO reports. I originally intended to make a book of around 250 interesting cases with quotes, references, and some analysis. However, as a collaborative effort, the result was quite different, as you know. I don't know how much I don't know. I also had one UFO sighting of my own, that while not proof of anything in any sense, gives me some insight into what being a witness is like. But every subsequent book or article published in English and in Elvish has been an attempt to contextualize historical UFO accounts as part of an evolution in human storytelling. Lumping flying virgins with flying saucers is interesting, if done properly, but not if you're addressing people who will take it literally. That would be a mistake. Once I'm not going to knowingly make again. UFO reports are all lies, lies, lies. And what we witness is how sincere and faithful true liars can be. When a visitation from space will really happen, it'll be something spectacular. We'll be certain of it within 5 minutes. I don't think we're really disagreeing at all. Every subject has to be defined, or else it quickly encompasses the entire universe. My issue is more that the category we today define as the UFO phenomenon is a modern creation, made from slicing and dicing a wide range of experiences, real and imaginary, or whatever, into a new set of boxes to fit modern assumptions. I'm interested in the degree to which UFOs as a category are created by the categorization we impose on a broader human experience. While I have you, I'm curious about the ship flying over a village story you referenced. What book was that from? The term identified flying object is in itself a problem. We don't have an all-encompassing definition for all the crap we notice on the ground, from lost coins to dead animals to everyday dark twisted pea-sized fragments in between or in the sea. So we're unlikely to find for anything in the sky. The term itself is famously problematic. Unidentified doesn't mean unidentifiable. Flying should imply intentionality. Object technically doesn't include combusting gases or optical illusions. Aside from many errors, the reason Wonders in the Sky doesn't work is that it fails to define from the outset what criteria have been used to gather the stories into a single volume. Amazingly, the reason it does work is exactly the same. Anything goes if it echoes your pre-existing views. I have always suggested keeping glowing angels and luminous discs in separate cages because the majority of UFO advocates don't know what comparing them means. I don't bother with fake hoaxes. That's almost right. Hoaxes, jokes, popular songs, dreams and short stories, parodies, pre-Arnold sketches, diary entries, and drunken hallucinations, poetry and actual claims, scientific reports and social panics, in fact anything that gives us a snapshot of the 14 landscape 50 years before. Oh, Alton's back. Let me save you the trouble of carrying on. You're trying to catch me in some kind of contradiction on the basis that I'm interested in hoaxes, so as well as other kinds of sources, so I ought to be interested in all hoaxes. This clearly stems from your belief that I accept that there's a physical reality underlying UFO reports, one to do with paranormal or extraterrestrial intervention. However, that's not my take at all. I like to keep an open mind, but I'm not trying to prove or sell a theory involving aliens or souls or psychic powers or even Jungian archetypes. I'm afraid you're wasting your time trying to catch me out.
Maybe the space alien devils made them do it. I don't think it's unheard of for people to donate material to a university, with the agreement that they won't be made available for a certain period of time. Once again, Vallee slithers around the truth and hides his fabrications by telling us the documented proofs were donated to an unnamed university, to be held for public view for 10 years or such time, as when Vallee had become so non compos mentis that he wouldn't care that everyone finds out what a fraud he is.
Not that I don't believe that the CIA or their nefarious brothers in the DIA aren't perfectly capable of concocting such a scheme, but to what end, quo vitas? To scare the natives? Why? The whole thing is too ridiculous, even for silly and draconian spooks to have been taken seriously and implemented. Maybe the silly and alien devils made them do it. I don't think it unheard of for people to donate material to a university with the agreement that they won't be made available for a certain period of time.
However, if it is a public university, I think that some sort of public disclosure would be made, since some funds for long-term storage and curation of the material would be involved.
The only way he would be obliged to protect it is if the documents were classified, and he received it via an illegal leak, in which case he should not be providing illegal documents to a university. If it's a Federation government document, even if it were classified and received it through an illegal leak, Vallee would be under no obligation to protect it, and would legally be free to publish it. Private citizens are not bound in any way by laws and regulations on classified materials. Only individuals with security clearances will have signed non-disclosure agreements bound by those laws and regulations.
If Vallee induced and incited, aided and abetted the leaker, he would face criminal charges. That's true whether he publicly reveals the material or donates it to a university under a 10-year embargo, or just holds on to it for his own personal enjoyment.
These people tend to be attention whores. So, I could also imagine him wanting an announcement of the donation on the front page of the library newsletter, or the university news website. This often happens with any large collection. Then why refuse to name the institution? Or such people sometimes conflate university with any kind of college. His idea of a collection stored at a university could just as easily consist of a shoebox of papers stuck in a shelf in the broom closet of the Scranton Community College Library, in which the staff forgot a month after it arrived. If it did happen, it would be tracked down, unless the institution that received the donation accepted it on condition of not even revealing its existence until the embargo was over. But that's getting into a bit too much cloak and dagger for libraries. Place Villas Boras in a state of confusion from the chemical aerosol sprayed on him on the helicopter above and the carefully mocked-up interior, and the incident could be easily achieved. Something like this, a 50s helicopter could have done the job. Certainly big enough. But we really should focus on the primary issue of this. Namely, is the document that Vallee has in the possession a document, or is it just a typed report mailed to Vallee? The first scenario, then it's big news. One is the document that Vallee says he has. The other is the paper that Rich put together in the 70s from claims but they're near identical in content. Both are about South Sicilian Draconis 1950s era fabricated and simulated abductions. There's nothing new about all this, though I should stress that Via Boaz was not a UFO event. It was a total setup. No aliens at all. Maybe this will open up some doors, but I'm not holding my breath. No doubt an intelligent individual. No doubt that some of the beliefs that CV operates under would be considered delusional at best. But why bother hoaxing such a thing? You can say what you want and I'll do the same, but we can debate this forever. But unless we get to see the document, which is really at the heart of it all, this debate will continue until who knows what, and there's little chance of any advancing. Rich was given in 78 almost identical info that Vallee is talking about today with CIA helicopters in South Sicilian Earth and faked ET abductions. Now, how's that possible? I wasn't even born yet. I certainly can't provide the theory and opinion of what the two have said. I can't stop saying that because I do think it was a helicopter, but there's not a chance of getting answers by just doing a back and forth here. So I'll have words with Rich and see if he can open up anything else. He really is the guy to speak to. On Vallee, or he could expand on its CIA angle. Hold on a second. You criticize me for not providing the documents he's talking about. The fact that he didn't, despite the long promotion of the idea that some of the UFO incidents could be deceptive and made by the government, tells you a lot. At the end of the day, it is private diaries and under no obligation to reproduce anything regarding his private notes. You should know it, and maybe you should decide not to attack him anyway. I just wonder why. So the older someone gets, the more fair and objective we should be with them. Let's hope to fairness and objectivity with the younger fringe authors. People discuss it tend to have long established track records for BS. It doesn't improve with age. Pleading age instead of trying to defend their work is the merits of a cop-out. You always should be fair and objective regardless of age, but presenting data in a manipulative way is bad. And you all think that I'm Vallee, but that's just the aliens talking. And you and Jason still think that Nepotizia owes you some proof, but he doesn't. Oh crap, they found us. Now he tells us. With the space giants over there? Those are merely automatons, they're not alive. Oh, now you tell us.
I was in the strangest place, but now I'm here. I was saved by her. I'm the Red Angel, and there's no time to explain. Set the space-time coordinates. What's going on? I demand to know what this is.
And it certainly wasn't a distraction to keep us busy for ages. The anomaly will be on us in moments. The planet will be obliterated. I can hold it off long enough for us to set the controls.
The coordinates are set.
Well, they're coming too. We have angered the space gods. Really, I had no idea that was real. Get hold of yourself. They're part of this, whatever it is. No space gods or any kind of god. Just an advanced alien tech stolen by some immature Sicilian overlords from this timeline. If that's true, then even I have been duped. Unlikely, yes, but sure. Alright, prepare the space-time displacement.
When you go back to your time, you can prevent the space war they warned about. Have Nog order the immediate arrest of the rebel captain. Prevent him from later assaults.
That would change the destiny some of them are on.
I want my life back, my wedding back, and to be back in my time, all of it. I agree, but sometimes you can't go home again.
That's exactly where we're going, lassie.
That was insane. Can we do it again?
No. Captain Nog, come in. Nog here. Where have you been? We lost contact with you when the rogue bird of prey appeared. She's still out there. Can you still track her well cloaked? Yeah, why? No time to explain. They may be monitoring. Direct me to the bridge. I'll take care of this. You're gonna take on the renegades with a fake sword. You're nuts, sir.
I have a better idea. Just trust me. Koloth and Vitriol, I'm going to need you.
But with the villains. Yeah, we almost got you killed back then. You'll have to do something soon. I detest paradoxes.
Don't get yourself killed. I will not. Nog, beam us all to their bridge.
Oh, it'll work. We have transporters we nicked from the future. Yes, sir. Prepare to destroy the Terrans. Bombard the wedding party. Ha ha ha.
Drop your weapons.
Or do not. However, I will slay your tactical officer. And I will slay the helmsman. How did you know? How could you possibly have known it was me?
Shut up, or I'll hit you with this fake sword you sold Everson and his friend. You mean the captain is an imposter? Yes, he's a time traveler, or he will be. He'll make a mess of the future.
So we are here to arrest him. How did you even know? I demand to know. Shut up, or I'll hit you with this fake sword you sold to Everson and his friend. You really expect me to fear the fake sword? Ha! I would sue you as soon as you tried to cut me with it. You and those other bloggers are dumb. I should never have dealt with him for so long. But I'll finish you all. Guards, fire on them at once. How dare you just stand there? Well, they can't move. We have suspended them in a force field. Paris O'Brien, you may do the honor. But it's impossible, man.
I said, shut up.
Looks like this one's getting a boat. Not a moment too soon. Hope you like space, Gitmo. Matthews to the tell. The renegade ship is ours. This is Nog. Are you kidding?
No, we're not. The ship is ours.
Aye, the ship is ours, Captain. Commander's Log Supplemental. To us, our adventure in space-time seemed like it had been for several days or weeks, but it was only 7 hours here. We stopped the renegades, and the wedding reception can resume. There will likely be another one when the others get back. Prize Hunter is in custody and will be tried in Federation space, but joint Klingon forces have asked to send him to Rurapente for being a traitor. We agree. He can finally meet his giants there.